Okay, cool. Great. Well, welcome to today's subproject meeting for declarative APIs and linters. And I think we're just going to start off. Today is October 21st. I know it looks like Chris, did you have maybe the first agenda item today? Do you want to discuss this?
Yep.
Awesome. Do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. So maybe where I'm coming from, I've got a pull request up in controller tools, which is about to add an additional generator for generating metrics configurations. And I'm here now today because Joe left a review and thought about, hey, is there some precedence about defining markers and the way how to define markers and maybe this round could be the right to discuss topics like this. So don't know how to kick off this best. Yeah,
First, you said Joel was the looking at this, or
yep.
Joel, do you want to discuss any maybe some of your thoughts there?
I'm just trying to remember because this was a while ago. I think it was mainly about whether there was precedence of this kind of pattern. Do we have any metrics generation in other places? Are there pitfalls in the design of the markers that DV have discovered that where we might want to be kind of aware of that as we're designing a new system of markers? Um, those kinds of questions of like, we're building something new here. What could we get wrong? One thing I noticed is all the documentation says it's plus metrics with a capital M. Everything else is lowercase in DV, so that's one thing. But just kind of looking for general feedback on the structure of the markers, I think.
No, for sure. Did anyone want to? So yeah, I think in DV right now the formatting is obviously we have like a case prefix with that, but yeah, it's lowercase here, and then we use like an equal sign payload. This is like colon payload, which is more similar to like QBuilder format, I think. So that's maybe an interesting note. But did anybody? I'm trying to think if there's any. Like interesting. Did anyone else want to weigh in on maybe like what they think for metrics formatting or any interesting notes here on the generation? Can you maybe just talk a little bit about the feature, Chris?
Yeah, sure. So there's an option in kubestate metrics to generate metrics from configuration, which then allows kubestate metrics to scrape custom resources. Because per default, of course, kubestate metrics only exposes metrics for core types like pods, deployments, and so on. And actually, this stuff here exists already for some time ago. It's just slowly getting to that PR and hopefully getting that in some time. So what this is doing is we add these markers to our API types, like to a field like status replicas. And at the end, what we get is a YAML configuration for kubestate metrics, which then leads to a metric, which is, for example, my machine deployment underscore status underscore replicas. So we infer the path from where the marker is, for example, and have some options to add to the marker. Like additionally, I want to have these labels on that config. So what this results in is into a typed struct, which is the configuration for kubestate metrics. And there, at the end, are three different kind of metrics we have, which is info metrics, which expose different information via labels. Then there are normal gauche metrics, for example, exposing counters like replicas or available replicas or something else. And then there are state set metrics, which are typical, for example, for conditions, like you have a condition and you have different condition statuses, and for each of those condition statuses, you will get a metric for your condition type. These are the three main markers this exposes. So for each type of metric, we have a different marker at the end. And that basically results into this custom resource configuration. which then is consumed by kubestate metrics. Yeah, we before that we have, or nowadays we have to write up that configuration on our own. We did use that tool in Cluster API already to generate the current config, and it already helped to get rid of some bugs we had in the handwritten config. So yeah, that's I hope that gives some better context on that.
No, that's super helpful. Yeah, as far as I'll have to look maybe a bit more exactly on how to align, but I think it's a great point from Joel that it makes sense to align things here. But yeah, outside of maybe just some syntactical pieces, did anyone else from the call have any thoughts on maybe how to align this with DB or just best practices for tags here?
I think just one point from my side, that we have to use some sort of prefix and we have to make it probably controller gen specific, right? Because if we declare is basically metrics is our names on namespace and other people in Go use it for I don't know what, then that's a bad thing. And I think for declarative validation, they use Kates, which makes sense because that's like Kates wide stuff. But if you basically only implement this in controller gen, and I think it also doesn't really make any sense for built-in resources as far as I can tell, because kubestate metrics is basically able to hard code metrics for built-in resources. There's probably only a COD thing. I don't know if there is like something that makes the scope of this beyond controller gen, right? I don't know if we have to come up with another prefix that sort of makes sense beyond controller gen.
Yeah. Are there any other controller gen tags that have a controller gen prefix, or with this?
Yeah, usually what we use is kubebuilder. But kubebuilder is also basically like a legacy prefix in the sense of that in the past, basically everyone assumed that kubebuilder, controller runtime, and controller gen is just all the same thing. But it's absolutely not. So I think that's like more like a controller gen internal init. If when we pick a prefix for us, if we should continue adding more stuff with kubebuilder, which is basically a different project, or if we should more like introduce new things under controller gen.
I see. Is there any thoughts there how we can hash out maybe this prefix? Is controller gen or hyphens allowable? I don't know. Does anyone have any opinions on what that prefix could or should be?
My only concern there is one of the things about the kubebuilder prefixes meant everyone went and looked for the kubebuilder project and raised issues there. Our project is not called controller gen, it's called controller tools. So do people know if they see controller gen where they need to go and report bugs?
Yep. We can definitely add like, from my point of view at least, have a Kates prefix, then colon, and then have a controller gen prefix. I don't know if that's okay for like Kates as a whole, if you start with a pattern like that.
I see. Yeah, I don't know the best. Would using controller tools be an option, or?
I would probably. So the thing with controller tools is controller gen is essentially that controller tools is the repository name and controller gen is the binary that we publish. So that makes, I think, controller gen the better choice between the two. Just that yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we have some options. Maybe controller gen. Then I'm just trying to think of ways that maybe how to help Chris here. I don't know if there's maybe another discussion thread, or maybe just on the issue there we can continue that. Did anyone else have any ideas for the metrics naming here? Yeah, I don't think that we have like a de facto set of standards, but I think like lowercase and then having it prefixed just because of other tools makes a lot of sense. But outside of those two things,
the others are same, right? So like this equal stuff with key values, that's the same in kubebuilder today, controller gen, what we already have versus what DV is using. Which all you maybe know that like potentially, if there's like a minor difference in like syntax and markers between DV and controller gen.
Yeah, for DV that we have a if you look at the parser, essentially like the formatting right now, it's I can just maybe put this like with the tag, there's a prefix, right? So it's plus Kates, so that's our prefix name. Then you have a tag. I don't know the best tag to put because so essentially like there's a couple some tags they have just a payload value. So that's equal sign, then it's called the payload. And then this payload can actually be another tag. So that's like maybe 2 in the weeds for this case. But so the tag can either be like a scalar value, or it can be another tag itself. So that would be something like equals, like it could be then like
you can nest them essentially, right?
Exactly. So but only certain tags that have this formatting, and then essentially we also have this. Each tag can optionally take this, like has a paren arg field, and then this is kind of like the left hand side is what we've explained this as. But essentially, tags that accept this argument, they help to specify like an additional parameter around where they target. So subfield, for example, is a tag that can only be used, or is supposed to be used on shared objects. So like metadata name, because you don't want a validation on the object, like on the type itself. Like you don't want it on metadata.name, the validation. You want it on this instance, this object's instance of metadata name. So you use subfield to retarget, essentially like the validation to the left-hand side. So essentially this field usually dictates where the error will go. So again, maybe it's not relevant to metrics. And then you have like the payload that would be then like chaining into this other tag that is retargeting like where the error is or where the validation is on. So similarly, we have a way to put a validation on an item in a mapper list. So this is kind of, this like syntax is just for the left-hand side of the errors. And then this is for the payload of the actual like tag.
Yeah, but what you don't have, so I think what Christian was doing and what we also have in other markers is that essentially we have multiple values for a marker, sort of. So we have like one main value, but then you have like a bunch of other information that you can add with like a, I don't know, semicolon separated list or something like that.
I see. Yeah. So I don't know if it makes sense to stand it, because there's the QBuilder that uses that pattern already, but that's just maybe another delta. Oh, Joe, you have your hand up, Joe.
Yeah. So we already have multiple types of tags that have grammars that are different. So we have like at least 2 flavors in Kubernetes itself, probably more before we standardized on the new Django format. KubeBuilder has a pretty nice format that it's been using for a long time. We're not going to be able to change that. I think the important thing is that we're very clear on what the prefix means. I think the prefix means that you are an authority over the rest of that tag. So if it's KubeBuilder colon, then KubeBuilder is the authority on how the rest of that tag works. If it's Kate's colon, then Kate's is the authority on how that tag works. And within Kate's, we could have multiple ones, right? So I could imagine controller gen being reasonable, right? That's just an authority. It could either be just controller gen or controller gen.Kate's or something, or Kate's colon controller gen. I don't have an opinion on that part, but I think what's really important is that we agree on what the prefix means and what the authority of the tags is.
I think that makes sense as far as maybe the tags don't need to align, but we just need to have a sane way for folks to understand, like kind of the authority of the tag and the semantics and grammar around the tag.
So that makes me a little bit worried about metric, because it's not clear to me that that's a statement of authority and who the authority of that is. I mean, that could work, but we just have to define that really clearly.
Yeah, so hopefully, Chris, does that make sense? It sounds like maybe if we can get a, we mentioned the lowercase, but then also just adding this prefix, maybe just agreeing on that, maybe that would be a good next step.
Yeah, but just try to find a hand raised button. But yeah, I totally agree that has to change, and that will change in the PR for sure. And thanks for all the recommendations here.
Awesome. Sweet. No, thanks, Chris. Okay, cool. Maybe we can go to Joel as the next item, which is around local overrides for markers.
Yeah, so this came up from a Slack conversation I was having with Yongri. We were talking about the unique markers. Yeah, unique markers linter, and I don't know the answer to this, but the question was, will it validate that if you had, say, max length on a field, and then on a type alias that field was using, you also had max length, whether it would report that as an issue? Now, in controller tools, we recently fixed this issue. Basically, what we'd seen is people had been reusing types, applying validations at the field level, and then what controller tools would do would implement both validations. So you'd have an any of in the structural schema, any of length 10, length 20, whatever it was. Which meant that actually you would be restricted by whichever was stricter. So if you had a type you were reusing and you wanted to allow, say it was a string type, you wanted to allow it to be longer in a certain use case, you couldn't actually do that because the any of would still be restricted to the one that was on the type, which was shorter. So we made some changes recently to fix another bug that also introduced this change. And we went with the route of if you created a local override at the field level, this would override the validation within. So now if you had put min length or max length, min length, whatever it was, at the field level, that would override what was on the type. It sounds like declarative validation would be similar to what we used to do. So my question was that a very deliberate choice? Is this something we thought about? I know we try not to encourage people to reuse types, but realistically they do. Is this going to cause us an issue if we have differing behavior? I suspect the answer long term is yes.
I see, Yanri, I know you're in the chat. Did you want to talk about this issue? I know you were in the thread there, or I'm also happy to talk about it.
So declarative validation will run both validation on the types and the fields. I think we don't have any conflict if the validation on the field is stricter, then so it will run both, which means the stricter will take effect on the field one. The only conflict is that if the control tools will always override for a local one, which means if it's linear, then the type definition one, it will also take effect. That's the difference between the DB now, because DB will generate the validation for both, which means the stricter will take effect essentially. So from my point of view, if the local field is linear than the type definition, it quite confused, right? If the root definition is stricter, but the local one is linear, why the root definition, the validation won't take effect and will be overridden by the local one. So the author they don't quite know which one exactly should take effect, right?
I think in a lot of cases, what we've seen, certainly from bug reports, is that people are expecting to be able to override it at the field level and then not realizing that they're not able to. So I think something I saw before was enums where you'd add an extra value for a particular use case, right? I've seen that before. I've seen the length thing. I've seen other things as well. But like, it's currently not necessarily obvious to people, certainly from the CI thing that we've seen, that both validations still apply when there is only one correct value. Obviously, like if they put min length right next to each other with two different values, that's stupid. Don't do that. The linter will tell them off. But people expect to be able to reuse types. They expect to be able to like adjust the validation. Like if we implement the subfield, for example, I would expect people to be starting to use that, right? Like they bring in an external type, they add subfield to add their own validation to that. If it's making it more lenient, why? If that's their choice, why wouldn't we allow them to do that?
So when the author had for the root types, they want the specific validation to take effect. And if someone uses it, they may not know about the root type definition and they like forget what it means, then the links will take effect, right? Then you can check that there's a validation on root type, and which means the both that can protect the root type its own identity, the attribution. So one thing I'm worried is that if we always override the local field, does it mean the root types its own validation, the protection will lose its own ability, right?
So, Yano, you're just saying, to clarify, it's like you're worried that the root type doesn't get to be authoritative for the validations anymore, if you will.
Yeah. Like it's more like you want the user who use the root types have more control, or the root type author can still make sure it's all its type has the same validation that would take effect globally.
So I guess
Yeah.
one of the interesting things here is that I guess in DV, if you're importing another type, it will look up the validation function for that type and reuse that, right? Whereas
Yes.
in a CRD schema, we print out a whole new schema every time. So we're not comparing equal things here. So maybe it does make sense that they can be different, because we're not using reference to existing validation. We are creating new validation for every copy of the object, every use of the object. I mean, it's something we'd have to codify into the linter and be like, if you're using CRDs, don't do this, or do this, or whatever it is. But maybe that's okay. I'm just trying to think of, like, if someone was using a core type, how would this affect them in a CRD? Okay.
So yeah, I think for CRD, it's more like the user its own control. They want that control for everything. So if they importing a root type, it's more like using an additional library. I think that makes sense if the CRD had more control for local fields. But that will introduce the difference. Right? The DB will still look up all the root types and trace back to all the validation it have. Any thoughts?
Yeah. So I looked into this in the past, and if I remember correctly, controller gen was doing all of validation, the local validation also, and the field validations also. And DB is also doing all of validations. But it's possible, like, I think that if the stricter validation will always take the place, always be effective. Like if the max length is, there are two max length, 50 and 10. So 10 will be always effective. The 50 will be like just a noise in the error. So they are both use cases, right? Sometimes the types are also transposed from one field to another field. If we are not honoring the root field validation, that's for the another type where the validation is not is stricter, the transpose will fail. So ideally, we should do all of only. So does it make sense? So because the types are, if you're using common types, then types are about subject to be transposed from one field to another field. And if we are not honoring the root field validation, then transpose will fail most of the time.
If someone if someone goes and reuses a core type and they're using that just as a way to say, right, here's my pod spec and I'm going to stamp that pod spec out onto another thing, I totally get that. In core types, we have strict API review where people are going to pick up on this thing. But controller gen has to consider the entire extension use case of, like, people we don't even know or could identify who are doing random things. So I suspect that, yes, while Jordan is doing the API review, he can enforce these things, and I can do that inside Red Hat and whatever. There won't be people who share that opinion in the wider ecosystem, and they will want to do this override thing, and then it's surprising to them when they can't.
I see. I think first we have to define what's the definition of type. If we are saying that it's a pod type, then the pod name should be less than 64.
I'm talking about like a Go struct, right? Either someone uses a Go struct, or you've created a type alias to a string and you've put a bunch of like validations on that. I've seen people reusing those and adding specific validations that are less strict. That's
correct. I think even for, let's say something is enum, right? There are 4 values. Do you want to allow 5th value when it's used in a field? I think that's the question. Then it's not a type actually. If you are allowing the new values, you should be more stricter on it. Like for that field, you might allow like just 3 options.
The question is that the CRD wants the override for everything. So even it's linear, they want to override it want to still take effect.
So we are doing all of it, right?
No, I mean when you import the core type, the current control J will still allow the local validation be more linear. They will override the stricter one from the core type.
Yeah, we only
currently
use the one
DB
on the field. If there's something on the field, we only going to use the one on the field. That was just recently changed, by the way. Just to mention.
Yeah. I think
so. Older version of controller chain behave the way you were saying. It's doing all of, but controller chain main is only taking the local one if there's a local one.
I see. So earlier it was doing all of when I evaluated. I think the all of solution is like, if it's like more, otherwise we are losing the possibility of transposing other, because the local field validation might be more lenient. And when we go to the stricter one, so let's say someone created replica of a copy of deployment CRD, and they want to create pods out of it. Those all validation will start failing again and will break most of the things. So that's why if it's a pod spec, then we should honor pod spec, and you can put more validation over it, and it will make it more restricted. Like let's say the name can be Google something, or like Amazon something. Okay, I think that's what it was.
So,
sorry, Joel.
Sorry, I do want to wrap this up. I guess my point was, I'm not talking necessarily about people using built-in types like importing pod spec, validating it as something different, then sending it to the API server and it gets rejected. I'm talking about people who are like, I define my own local object reference and I'm using that 3 or 4 times within my CRD, but in one case I want something that's more lenient. They don't want to have to then go and copy and paste that whole type again to make that one more lenient. I guess you could argue that they could be more lenient in the default case and then add the override at the field level for the other cases, but that's not what people are doing.
But that might be a breaking change, right? So I mean, if you already released a version of your ZRD with that type, then I don't know if you can still change it. So it could be like a new use case where you want to be more lenient, but you can't change the underlying type because that's already like an API. I mean, a lot of weird stuff can happen, right? I'm not saying like it's necessarily good. And I think we are also not really, so I think the kind of stuff you're thinking about is not necessarily something like pod spec, where it would basically never work if you be more lenient. It's more like, I have like a very small structure. I have like maybe just a type that is a port, or port is also a very bad example, I know. Yeah.
I think we can still maintain it. Like for the code builder, it can its own tags always override. And because I think for now, we don't want the code builder tags inside KK, right? And we just want to push the DV tag into the code builder. If we want the code builder to have its own authority to override everything, we can just keep the code builder tag. And then when there's conflict, then we just make sure the code builder tag take more priority. It still works in DV, and I think you can still use the core type validation and still keep the authority, the overriding ability for code builder.
Just to clarify, with the patch that's currently gone in, if I added a DV level validation at a field level, and that was then used at the type alias, the DV at the field level would be overridden as well on keyboard.
Yeah, I think
on control gen.
Yeah. So basically, controller gen treats the cube builder markers that way, but it also treats the Kate's markers that way at a moment. I think we don't really have that many Kate's markers in controller gen at the moment yet, right? So I don't know if it's Joe, you're more familiar with implementation. I don't know if there's like a way that we could basically treat the Kate's markers differently than the cube builder markers, the way that controller gen works.
We're going to have to re-implement the way they're parsed because they're not compatible with our current parser. So potentially.
I guess that question, right? If C or D is just fundamentally need to be handled differently, there is why can't controller gen handle that separately than what KK is doing? I can understand that could be a little bit confusing, but if there's just things that are the case in KK that are not generally applicable outside of that, it seems like we should facilitate that the outside of that use case for CRDs, as opposed to, forcing them into the same pattern of KK where everything is in a controlled environment there. whereas we don't have control over that environment, like Joel was saying, on the outside of KK case.
I think it's originally from the unique tech linter that they want to trace back to everything, and whether we want to forbid this kind of tags writing. So it's original. The case why we're discussing this is that whether this linter will trace back all the alias and find all the tags and forbid this kind of writing. If we allow this kind of situation, we need to we don't need to trace back all the types definition and try to collect all the alias its own tags and just allow this kind of duplication on the fields and all its alias, right?
At the moment, it is type aware. So it will collect the field and the type and report the duplicates, which I think is compatible with what DV wants. My suggestion is that we maybe add an option to turn off the type aware collection, which would then be compatible with controller gen. It wouldn't be a break and change, and it would just be a case of if people want to do the override behavior, they have to toggle that in their QAPI linter config.
Is there a way for us to turn that into like a warning as well, in case someone's like, "Oh, I actually didn't realize I was doing an override here. I actually am fine with that."
Yeah, there's no warning level for linting, unfortunately.
Or just that the KubeBuilder and DV tags are actually they are different, right? So we can allow them to be exist together, and just if they have the exactly same KubeBuilder tags, then we forbid it. But for the DV tags, we allow. We can differentiate in this way.
I'm hoping long term that we promote people to stop using the KubeBuilder tags in favor of DV tags. So, like, one of the open issues is to create something called preferred markers, which would allow you to say, here's my marker I want you to use, here's the previous versions of it that you shouldn't be using anymore, and it would come and say, right, don't use this anymore. So I suspect long term.
Yeah, I understand, but I don't see this overriding thing will be resolved ideally, because CRD and native type still have some
the realization I was having earlier is that the validations are different, right? That's what I was saying about, like, in DV it's reused, in CRDs it's not. When you generate a schema, we have that unique schema for every use of the type, which is why I suspect that actually, even though it might be slightly confusing, we are okay to have a difference in behavior here.
Yeah, I think what is just potentially problematic is, so if we are saying long term we want to use DB markers instead of the QBuilder markers, which I think makes sense, then we also don't want to lose functionality, right? So basically, if I switch from QBuilder marker to DB marker and I was able to do an override with a QBuilder marker, I also want to be able to do an override with the DB marker, at least in a CRD, not saying in built-in types. And then I think where it gets really complicated is, let's say you have a core type where you have already like markers on multiple levels that are overriding each other, and you basically have the semantic within the core type to use an all-of. And then you embed this thing into a CRD with another level, where you basically combine like an all-of on like a built-in type levels with an override that you would get on a CRD level. I'm just not sure how intuitive all of this is anymore. Right? Because also like controller gen does not know where the types are coming from, right? So if I'm embedding a type in a CRD, it has like no knowledge of this underlying type is coming from a core type or not. It just knows it's like a struct and has markers. And also maybe just looking at it from a different perspective, just an easy variant of the same problem. If you have this all-of semantic within core types and you just embed exactly this in a CRD, then you probably want to keep the all-of semantic for that type, right? You don't want that basically an entire struct with that override behaves differently in a built-in type as when you take the same entire struct with the override that's already in there and put it into a CRD. Then you don't want to have like a different schema. So like you would get an all-of if it's like in a built-in type, but if you put the same thing into a CRD, you would get an override.
Which is what I think that's where adding unique markers to KK prevents us ever having that issue.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Because we would never have min length in two places.
So I definitely think this is good. I know we have a couple other items here. Maybe we can circle back, but I guess to summarize, did folks have a final? We can also talk about it maybe offline in the controller tools, the Slack.
Yeah, I think the conclusion is the way it works currently works well for KK. So we should move forward getting it implemented on KK. And then the CRD differences we can hash out separately.
Yeah, I think because it sounds like there's two questions. Maybe one is just how does kind of like hierarchically the tags work. So we have like two different patterns, and maybe just keeping those patterns. But so we have like the two patterns. I can like make this. I'll expand this after the meeting. And the other question is just linting. Actually, though, like do we want to lint differently? One is do we like the patterns currently, and one is do we want to lint things differently? Maybe we can take those offline. Did anyone have any final? It sounds like maybe we're still kind of figuring that out still. Do we have any final, maybe just in Slack after we can hash these out?
Yeah, it might be good to assign somebody that action item just to make sure that we follow up on it, but I think async is the right way to have the deeper conversation for a little bit.
Yanri, do you want to, I know you're just in the chat, do you want to do the linting piece, or I guess Yanri and Joel, maybe? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I can own this.
Okay, cool. And then I can come back to this, but yeah, I can also look at the patterns that we use in DV here. Cool. So yeah, we can do that async offline. All right, yeah, cool. And then maybe getting to the next, Joe, you had this topic on OpenAPI 3.0.
Yeah, this is kind of a tragedy. So I went and looked at OpenAPI 3.1. I encourage people, you might be good to just open that link I have there. I put everything into a document or into an issue on GitHub so we can track it. But basically, it's called 3.1, but that's not a Semver 3.1 because it has horribly breaking changes. So I listed out the three biggest breaking changes here. And I'm not going to go over them all in detail, but they're super backwards incompatible. So that's not, we can't just go from 3.0 to 3.1 as like an evolution. We can't just start adding new stuff because we would break existing usages. But there are things in 3.1 that we would really like. The main one is something called property names. And what property names is, it's a way to attach validation to map keys, which we don't have in 3.0. This came up because somebody was trying to recreate the labels structure that you see in Kubernetes, where it's a map of string to string. That's how we represent it. But it has validation on both the keys and the values. So if you have a CRD, KubeBuilder type that's importing another type, or just setting up labels itself so that it can put them somewhere else based on what it has, you're not going to be able to validate those keys. And so you don't know if you actually have valid labels. You can validate the values, but not the keys. Property names will just allow us to do that. It would also allow us to set a max length on that Cell would understand and would use an estimated cost, which is a problem that somebody ran into the other day. So it's a quagmire. I don't have the answer. I wanted to let this group know that it's out there because you probably all will run into this at some point. It's good to know. I really want to get it so that we can at least do some validation of map keys. The fact that we can't even handle labels reasonably, and that's like a native Kubernetes type structure, that's kind of embarrassing. Yeah, that's it. It's mostly just a PSA. If you want to track the issue, start watching it or whatever, and we'll have the conversation there. Thanks. Yes, that did come up, Bryce. The idea, I don't know if I think it's in the Slack thread where somebody's like, well, could we just do an X Kubernetes and stay on 3.0? I kind of think that might be the least bad option. So let's keep talking about that.
Or you pull the Band-Aid and you go 3.2.0 for OpenAPI spec.
It's so embarrassing because we thought they were using Semver and because they should have been using Semver. Our REST endpoint is like, /OpenAPI/v3. We didn't put a dot in that. We didn't put 3.0, so we didn't make nice room for 3.1. And also you've seen it in CRDs, it's just called OpenAPI 3 schema. right? Not 3-0 schema. It's like there's no place to fit this stuff. It's just going to be awkward.
I saw something related to that when I was looking at an exclusive minimum, which I think I saw called out as a breaking change in your thing.
Yeah, that one's really weird. They actually recycled the keyword, which is not something you're really supposed to do.
Does this work preclude adding cell for map stuff? Because we talked before about having match labels implemented in cell, because I think that's something that people quite often have to do with web.
No, it doesn't stop us from doing that. The only thing that we can't do with cell right now is know that there was an intended length limit on a map key and adjust and lower our estimated costs based on that if you are putting cell on that field. So it's super annoying when you run into it, but you don't run into it very often. In fact, right now, if you want to validate a map key, the only way to do it is with cell.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, and then if I don't see any hands or anything, if we're done with the open API discussion, Bryce, I think you had the next topic.
Yeah, so I think in the last call, I talked about planning to look into the DB tag parsing for kubeAPI linter to be able to add a little bit more of like generic support to kubeAPI linter for reading those values and being able to understand, what we need, what information we need out of those tags to be able to run certain validations. So I've got a work in progress PR there.
Awesome.
I think that long term we're going to need to maybe do like a rework of how we actually store markers for kubeAPI linter, because today there's no concept of like nested tag payloads within controller gens markers, which is what we initially built our implementation on. So there's that. But one of the things that I was kind of curious about is I noticed that there's some DB tags that have positional arguments where they are unnamed and some where they can be named. It looks like you can't have a mixture of the two, which is really nice. However, I was curious. I saw Joe had a open issue for the DB stuff around always having names for them. That would be really helpful in terms of how we do kubeAPI linters rules there, because if we had something, for example, taking like the kubebuilder CL expression, tag as like an example, if you had something where you had like rule expression or something, and we wanted to make sure that like rule compiled, if you had only positional arguments, we wouldn't really have a way to say, okay, this positional argument aligns with, this named thing, unless we do like some additional string parsing. In my current work in progress PR, what I do now is I just assign it to a constant string called unnamed, and it's just a comma separated list of all the unnamed positional arguments there. We could deal with that, but that's just kind of a thing. So I was curious if there was any more like, have we made any kind of decisions on always having named or anything like that?
So we did make it required that if you have more than one parameter value, that they all have to be named.
Okay.
So we didn't go as far as saying if you had one positional parameter that has to be named too, although maybe we should rethink that and always do that. I don't know, Aaron,
Is there a reasonable... Sorry.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Is there a reasonable like way that, given like the DB tag parsing logic, can say, okay, for this one positional argument that's unnamed, it is actually represented as this named argument?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, because one of the problems, and I'm just thinking this through, one of the problems is allowing it to be unnamed is that if you now add another one later, you actually can't do that in a forward non-breaking way, right? I had one as the value. Now I have to have key and a value for each of the things if I add another thing. So it might be better just never to have them. But I suppose you could always just call it value, right? Because there's always only one of them. And so there's no ambiguity. So we could just like pick an identifier and just always call it that.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I was just curious if it, like, I think the example in there was like a min and a max, right? If you always provide just the one positional argument there, right? Does that actually mean min is 1 and max is 0? You know, like.
Oh yeah, I think that's a really bad pattern. I think our example wasn't showing what we would actually do. Aaron, do you agree that like we would never just have a 1 there that represented min and max? We wouldn't overload in that way.
No, yeah, I don't think we would overload in that way. It's a good point though, as far as because this is a UX nicety really is what this is just so that folks for the positional args. But yeah, we wouldn't overload in that way.
Yeah, I'm tempted, Aaron, if you'd be interested in doing it, I'm tempted in RDV tags to just not allow positional params, because then later if you want to add a second param, there's no place to put it. So it doesn't allow for evolution. And even if you just have to call it value, but you have to call it something, right? Like that solves the problem.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely make that de facto. Maybe we can just go on the thread there, make sure everyone's aligned. I can get that process going and get that going.
Yeah, I think this is a really good call out, especially Bryce, even on the semantic topic of like, are you allowed to have like 2 ways to express the same thing? And then downstream systems to deal with that. I would love the answer to be no. There's always one way to express a thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that actually goes perfectly into my next question that I have up there as well. There's the concept of the tag payload. One of the things that I was thinking through with this, right, is once we start introducing conditional behaviors here, right, like all of the Kube API linter rules are going to need to be able to evaluate on like different conditions, right? To make sure we're enforcing best practices across all of those conditions. So one of the things that I was thinking through here is, and I saw that it's not allowed today, but do we ever envision that it's allowed to have something where you can pass multiple tags as the payload for a certain condition? Or would you need to continuously repeat that condition plus 1 tag, that condition plus 1 tag?
We decided to only allow 1 tag in the value in our grammar because it's a single line thing, and having just visually trying to have 2 tags on the right hand side started to get out of control really quick. I also think it kind of encourages you not to do too many conditional things, which I think makes the tags get a little out of control.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense to me. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't like there was consensus of like we are only ever going to make it so you can say it the one way of 1 tag at a time for a conditional behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So that makes it easier for me to implement that rolling up to a conditional kind of case within Kube API Linter.
Excellent.
So so there's a PR opening. There's a PR open to grouping all the conditional tags together. So currently, you are not allowed to chain the multiple validation into under one conditional tags, but you can put them separately. So there's an opening PR trying to group them together under one conditional check, but it hasn't emerged yet because there's something we hasn't decided how we proceed to implement it. You can also take a look to see whether it makes sense to group them together. It's basically kind of like putting multiple validation behind this one same conditional validator, but implement it in a different way.
Can you drop the link, or what? Could you maybe get the issue number just for folks to which PR was it, Henry, or issue?
Yeah, it's a PR under open on a dev branch. I will put a link here.
Okay, cool. Maybe just for folks that are interested in that. Okay, cool. I think those are the main topics. And then I think maybe we can do this for next time. I know we mentioned that I think the last meeting, the OpenShift had a kind of feature gating. I think maybe we can get to that next time. Yeah, for optional required, I guess maybe just like a speed round. I don't know if Joel wants to mention this, but yeah, so Joel made an umbrella tracking issue around getting optional required linting for KK, which is awesome. And that is, it seems like it's a good issue that folks can jump onto. So I think some people in the community have gone to it, if anyone here is interested. But I don't know, Joel, you wanted to say anything, express around that, or how people can do that. But that's kind of an ongoing effort right now.
Yeah, so I'll link the tracking issue in the doc in a moment, but I divided all of the linter rules that we have implemented to like done, in progress, ready to go, and then like needs work in cal or not applicable. So all of the rules we want to create currently open issues for are all in there as well. So yeah, go in, there's a column for assigned. If you leave a comment or poke me, I can assign different things to different people. I know that Kevin, one of the Red Hatters, picked up some stuff last night. Aaron, I know you've done some as well. So yeah, that's just kind of like a central tracking issue for all of the cal integration into KK at the moment.
Awesome, great. Yeah, so if anyone is interested or wants to follow the rules there, and then similarly, I think Declarative validation has an umbrella tracking issue for anyone to get started. I think some folks in the call have submitted PRs. We'll get to those at the end there. But yeah, that's just around enabling DV for all the types. Right now we have it on 3 or 4, but we're hoping to extend it to all the types and add some tags and then roll out even more tags over time. And then yeah, I think just quick updates, I guess, would be for essentially 135 for declarative validation, we're adding tags mainly to DRA to kind of show the impact. So if you just want to look at the types there, you should now see upstream, a number of these Kate's prefix tags, just to see kind of where the project's going and kind of the goal of it, just to understand that. And we're currently doing 136 planning. And if folks had thoughts, I think right now we believe essentially like the highest, the low hanging fruit is cross field validations, which is, we want to stop saying that term, but essentially fields where you tag a field, but it relies on the value of another field. So in Cell, there's a way of referencing those fields. In DV, we have, hopefully it'll look similar-ish, but a way of referencing other fields to bring into the validation of a field. So here you might see a minimum where you can specify, like in the configuration, if another value is the minimum that they specify in a config, how that could be done. So I just wanted to maybe get people, so we don't have a lot of time for this, but Brain, if they have thoughts here, we can maybe chat async about thoughts here. Some things are mutually required, mutually exclusive. You might tag end fields, and then only one of them could be set. They might all have to be set. And then we mentioned conditional, like if these things are set, then these validations might allow, which is not exactly cross field, but just trying to get people's thoughts going on where we're heading for 136. And outside of that, I know maybe we can add Cube API linter PRs here for external contributors. But yeah, we have a couple of PRs. I know folks in the call are here. I don't know if anyone had any maybe quick question on the PR, but if folks can just look at PRs in the queue, we definitely really appreciate all the external folks there. So if folks just want to poke around and make sure, either, I don't know if folks follow the Slack thread, but we have, we kind of called out the SIG API machinery dev tools. So if you want to come in here, this is kind of where we're chatting about all the things here offline. So for the PRs here, any questions that get brought up here, feel free to jump in there. I apologize, that was like a quick rundown or anything. I don't know if anyone had any questions or hands in the chat. I think that kind of brings us to all the topics for today. Cool. Great. Well, thanks for your time. Yeah, we can talk offline about these patterns and the lint rules around unique and stuff. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Bye.